The 1960s saw a change in the social fabric of America, and the University District embraced these changes.
Alternative kinds of organizations came together: the Columbus Tenants Union, Columbus Community Food Co-op, Open Door Clinic. The Columbus Free Press was one of a succession of underground or alternative newspapers at that time.
There was a lot of alternative politics and, of course, the alternative merchants.
By 1968, the stage was being set for a law and order candidate like Richard Nixon.
The country was pre-revolutionary in 1968. There were race riots, riots on campuses. The country was divided in a way that it had not been since the Civil War, worse than it is today.
In the spring of 1970, young minorities were calling for equality and representation, and young students across the campuses of Ohio were calling for the end to the Vietnam War. Combine all this with the news of the My Lai massacre and first draft lottery, and you've made a lot of students frustrated and ready to protest. On the morning of April 29, 1970, at Ohio State University, the 6-hour war took place as students began boycotting classes and picketed outside classroom buildings. Others gathered to the Oval to hear speeches. The crowd was an estimated 2,000 people. The protest spiraled out of control on 11th and Neal Street outside Hamilton Hall. Riot officers started to approach the crowd of nearly 5,000 protesters. Ohio State was rich with CIA and FBI undercovers. As these undercovers started to infiltrate the student groups and arresting student leaders, the crowd of students escalated into a riot. As a result, the students began throwing rocks and other objects, and not shortly after, the National Guard unleashed tear gas into the crowd. From 4 to 8 p.m., students broke into smaller skirmishes, where the patrol would be able to run down one group. 3 more groups would form on the other side of campus, and this was possible due to the large size of Ohio State. These groups became angry as lots gathered on High Street, where students chucked rocks and bricks as they damaged campus and local business windows. The Columbus police shortly joined the chaos after, where they stayed put among the border of campus on High Street, waiting to arrest students who came off campus. The police then charged towards the students, as they clubbed and arrested many due to the actions of the mob. The police were then strongly reinforced as they changed their location to 15th Avenue, firing tear gas at houses and apartments that lined the street, forcing students away. As the students withdrew their ground, they fired back rocks, bottles, and Molotov cocktails. The anarchy continued through the night as more than 300 people had been arrested. All arrested students were also suspended by the university. More than 70 people were taken to the hospital, and at least 7 were wounded by gunshot. The next day didn't help to ease any of the tensions that lasted throughout the night. This was because President Nixon went back on his words of pacifying our war efforts, as he went on to admit to the public that the U.S. had invaded Cambodia. Because of the Nixon announcement, other universities and campuses across Ohio were also in havoc. The University of Cincinnati sparked with tons of protests on May 1st. 2,500 students all got together to sit in the middle of the intersection on 5th and Walnut Street as an act of outrage. A total of 145 UC students ended up being arrested. Students from the neighboring school of Xavier University came in alliance with UC students to share together their disapproval. Miami University was another notable school whose campus erupted in student riots. Students' reasons for rioting included a demand for no academic credit for ROTC and a motto of, quote, no reprisal or repressions, end quote. Black student organizations aided to the power of the protests as they demanded, quote, a vote of support for all the black demands made on campus, end quote, thus becoming a combined civil rights and anti-war protest. The rioting began with a group of students marching on the Rodebush Hall lawn. The protest later would move to the school's naval ROTC building, Rowan Hall, where the students would eventually take over the building. The president of Miami University, Philip Shriver, would call upon 700 members of the National Guard to the campus in order to mild down the protesters with the use of tear gas. The shootings that happened at Kent State fired up campus riots across Ohio and led to the eventual closing of all 3 campuses mentioned. As a result, they wouldn't reopen until the end of May 1970.